So thank you so much, Svenja, for joining us. A little introduction. Svenja Hahn is a first-term member of the European Parliament for the Renew Group in the European Parliament. She's from Germany, from Hamburg. I believe you have a legal background. And
no, I don't.
No. Okay, so I didn't do my research.
You want to give I can give my background. I actually studied history, communication, and media studies, and I worked as a communication professional as a PR manager. So I'm one of the lawmakers that don't have a law background.
Even better. So we're very happy to have you here today because we're at the Consumer Choice Center, mainly work on policy areas that affect innovation and future technologies, existing technologies, which often are limited due to regulatory frameworks that maybe did not, when they were crafted, did not reflect how human interaction and technology could look in the future. And one big buzzword these days is artificial intelligence. Probably many people see different things in artificial intelligence. Some see the rise of robots ruling the humans, and others just see maybe some nice enhancements of apps and just making some silly tasks easier for us because machines take over these. We just wanted to use today's webinar for people that follow the discussion, but also for people being very new to the entire topic of artificial intelligence or AI, to see what we should be excited about. I would be curious to see and keen to see, Svenja, what you see in AI. What is artificial intelligence for you? Is it something we should be afraid of, or is it something we should be excited about? And then maybe later in the conversation, we can talk a bit, okay, what is actually happening on policy side, on regulatory levels? What's happening in this area? What are the problems? Are there the European or global or national approaches to this? But let's maybe just start and let me ask you, what do you think about artificial intelligence? Is it scary or exciting?
No, it's absolutely exciting. I mean, artificial intelligence already plays such an important role in our everyday lives and can take so much more of an even more exciting role. And let me make this very clear in the beginning. I first and foremost see that it has a tremendous chance for our society, for our economies, rather than a threat. It's just about how we use and enhance this potential. And if you ask me about what I'm excited about, I mean, right now in the situation with the corona, we talk a lot about how we can use digital means to make our lives better. Artificial intelligence can help medical professionals to improve prevention, diagnosis, and care procedures. It can speed up administrative processes in hospitals or care institutions. Through algorithms, mistakes can avoid, estimations can be much more accurate, harm to patients can be reduced, or cause of problems could be easier identified. So right now we see how much potential there actually is. And in so many other fields, there's so much room for being excited about this potential. I think if we look into transportation, one of the most used example is the car. And it's not only about this ethical question, who's the car driving over, in case if there's going to be an accident. That's like the ethical debate, but there's so much more to this aspect. So self-driving cars, for example, can make more transparent, more transportation more efficient, more environmentally friendly. Or if we look into education, another big topic right now, I'm coming from Germany, and we're so far behind in digitization, and especially at schools. We see it right now. Our pupils were sent home, and from 0 to now, the schools had to start to offer digital education. And some of them terribly failed because they didn't have the support to do that. Some of them took very good initiatives, but we don't have a working framework. And digital, and especially AI, has huge potential to individualize learning, individualize e-learning, and respond to the needs of students. So I'm actually very excited about AI.
That's good. So probably we share that excitement. You already mentioned two examples. You actually mentioned three examples, but maybe two examples we can start talking about without getting too technical and without talking too much about certain EU directives, because you really need to be an insider to understand too much of this. But let's think about healthcare, where you can probably have both an analysis of X-rays and testing results. I mean, it has been shown that artificial intelligence looking just at an X-ray scan of lungs are usually more precise than radiologists looking at it. And this is definitely exciting that we can improve the analysis of medical results and interpretations. But aren't there sometimes the problem that only doctors are allowed to look at the data, and the moment you have a third-party company which would need to analyze the data, especially, I mean, looking at health data, for instance, in a country like Germany, which is like sacred, right? I mean, basically no one is really allowed to touch this but the doctor and the patient. And do we need to have some reforms that we can actually use these new technologies in a legal way, and not being afraid on the one hand as a consumer that companies just steal my data and give it to others, and on the other hand as an investor or an entrepreneur who wants to develop something, not being afraid that you're always breaking the law the moment you utilize data? What do we need to do there?
Yeah, well, in general, there's a huge potential in science, in research, and it definitely can help prevent fighting diseases, just like we see now. But you're already mentioning a lot of points, and the basis of all AI strategy needs to be the data strategy that the Commission is drafting right now. Because we need in the EU a common approach. How do we collect data? How do we store data? Who has the right to access those data? If like the car example again, who has access to the data from the car? Is it only the car manufacturer? Will it be the small businesses that want the car to say, hey, you can use my garage if you need a garage on the road? Who learns from this? Will it be that's a relevant consumer question. Will my driving style affect maybe my car insurance? If I'm always speeding a bit too much, will my car insurance will get higher because I'm a more risky driver? So that has like a huge potential, and this is something where we as well need an operational European framework to avoid fragmentation of the single market and to close legal loopholes to make the EU legal framework fit for the digital age. So, and if we look into this, we need to make it in a way that we do not overregulate. We need to avoid red tape, but we need to provide legal certainty for businesses, for investors and consumers. Because if we go too much into one direction, we might not be having any AI made in Europe because we have too much protective approach. But on the other hand, we do not want to a loose situation and a too fragmented a system in the EU. So if I look into the work in the Parliament, this is exactly the debates that we're having right now. And as a lawmaker in the Parliament, we're actually doing quite a bit of pioneer work right now with proposals for AI legislation. We're only expecting law proposals from the Commission next year, and we're already working at own initiatives. So we must pay it exactly to what you said, attention that we do not overregulate for AI developers and businesses, because we really want to foster this innovation. But we need to have the legal framework fit for the digital age, and it's not there in all aspects. Just to give you some more insight, like right now, I'm in the Single Market Committee, and I'm rapporteur in shadow for quite some AI files. I'm rapporteur, for example, civil liability. What does it mean when my drone with AI crashes and falls on someone's head? Who's responsible, and who proves who is responsible for an accident with my self-driving car? AI in education and culture, ethical standards for AI in criminal law, law enforcement, We talk about stuff like facial recognition there. So they're like a broad take on AI, where we all need to check, do we need to adapt our legislation? Is our legislation still fit for today?
So that's interesting, especially the liability point, right? Because suddenly from in the past, relationships were usually two-sided in most cases, and now with AI, they're at least three-sided or even four-sided if different insurance companies come even in, and whose insurance should pay for something. Is it the driver, the manufacturer, the software producer, the data warehouse's insurance? You know, this can be all different players. Do you already have, like, with your work in the parliament, do you already have some ideas in how you define liability, or like, do you work on a framework? Because yes, this is a question, but in which direction should this move?
For example, we need to look into the product liability directive. We do with this have a well-functioning instrument in place to protect consumers and to make sure they get compensation when there's harm. But AI has some specifics or specific characteristic, like the black box effect of algorithms, which might make it impossible for consumers or a harmed person to show that a defect caused by a product or an accident caused by a product is the product's fault or is the fault of those that use the product. So I think that is why we need to touch upon a principle we had so far in the justice system, that we need a revision of the burden of proof. Because right now, you as a consumer need to prove that it was not your mistake that this accident or harm happened. But as a consumer in the future, it might be impossible for you to prove that. So we need to change it, that the producer must be liable and must have the burden of proof. So that would be kind of a revolution in liability regime. But moreover, we need to look into the definitions and some current legal framework because it's just not fit for purpose. For example, staying with the product liability regime, we need to look into software. Software is not considered in there, and we have products that come as a service, a product combination with software, and we need to take this in there as well. So there's actually a lot to do, but in general, I think when we think about new regulation, we always have to keep a core principle in mind that we should not only regulate problems which are already existing, but anticipate and problems that might come up. So don't be too narrow, but have like a general basic approach that is open for development that could come, so that we don't tend to what is happening now a lot in the area of digital and AI. Something is invented or developed, and years later, lawmakers tend to regulate this specific thing. So we need to have a principle regulation with the key to foster innovation.
So before we go more on that point, actually, because that's an important point, I just would like to tell everyone of our attendees that we're very open to Q&A. There is a Q&A button here. I know we've all been using Zoom for 10 weeks, but in case you have not discovered that button yet, there should be a Q&A button. Please just enter your questions, and my colleague Luca will actually look at them and make sure they end up on my screen as well. But yeah, let's talk about this. So this is an issue we also work on. We usually call it technology neutrality. So regulation should not just talk about one certain algorithm or one certain technology, because that's like regulating something. I mean, we have so much innovation happening, especially in the digital space. I mean, I remember using MySpace. There are a lot of people, maybe even in this webinar, who don't know anymore what MySpace was. That was like
I
something
heard about it, but I actually didn't use it. Maybe
yeah, so you could basically select music songs you liked, and then people could see your playlist. And that was like very social thing. That was pre-Facebook. But I mean, it was like back then one of the biggest social networks, and then just disappeared, right? And now everyone talks about how to regulate Facebook, more or less, very specifically. And then with these laws are being made, it's like a huge effort for all of you and the commission and all the lobbyists and civil society involved. And 3 years later, people use something totally different. Maybe everyone uses TikTok or some virtual reality application, which doesn't even exist yet. And you basically have to overhaul this again and again, right? So it's always playing catch up. Whereas, I mean, it's very encouraging to hear that you think it should be much more like a framework on artificial intelligence, which is like more robust, because it's like wider than just looking at like one specific healthcare algorithm right now, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think we especially now, we talk a lot about ethics in AI, and right now we need to talk about basic fundamentals we want to have. In the beginning, you asked me a bit about what I'm scared of or what I'm concerned about. And of course, there are things I'm concerned about. We have many challenges coming up through this. And we, in general, I don't want us to overprotect or overregulate, but we need to have some basics like protection of fundamental freedoms. We're seeing it now again with the Corona and Corona apps, especially in China, which is used as a massive surveillance tool. It's a mass surveillance tool, and that's why we need to say in the beginning what are our limitations to use of artificial intelligence. For example, we always need to defend freedom of speech online. A clear note, for example, to facial recognition and law enforcement. And we need to look as well into what does it mean for consumer protection. I gave the example with speeding in my car. What are like the red lines we are drawing on predicting people's behavior in, for example, insurance and consumer aspects, but as well in law enforcement. And we need to say, where does an AI needs human surveillance? This is what's mostly called high risk or no high risk. I believe 2 levels are not enough there. But for example, high risk could be anything where it's directly involved around a human, for example, in medicine areas. Maybe looking at the X-ray, could you say, okay, it's not operating or something on a human, but detecting this certainly needs that a doctor looks over it as well. But for example, robots working with AI could stitch your skin instead of nurses or medical staff. Does a human need to look into that? That's like questions we need to raise. Where are our guidelines and where are our red lines?
Interesting. So we're already getting a couple of good questions. Before we go into this, maybe you already talked a bit about China and some scary AI being used there just to mass surveil 1.4 billion people. In your discussions with your colleagues in the parliament, do you also talk about from which country AI comes? Like, are you concerned about some countries which use it domestically for mass surveillance of companies from these countries also being active in the EU?
This is unfortunately not yet in the broad scope of the discussion. I'm pretty sure it's going to come up. For example, we have a file on AI and international law as well. But we must talk about this as well when we talk about trade aspects. I'm in the trade committee as well. When we talk about products with AI, machines with AI, what are our standards? Margrethe Vestager, for example, spoke about that our artificial intelligence must be approved. I think it will be impossible that every AI will be approved, but we need to talk about open source, making coding transparent, and maybe, for example, if you want your product protected and trademarked, then you need to explain and give a draft how your product works already to an authority, maybe national or European authority. So we as well could talk, for example, high risk application, driving, drones, working on humans, that those must be authorized as well. This is a debate we really need to have. I think it will be impossible to supervise every AI that will be out there. That's impossible. This is not, who suggests something is not realistic about this. But we need to have those guidelines, and we need to have those guidelines. And of course, if this is the framework we operate in the European Union, then only products with AI that fulfill this guideline should be allowed to enter the European market. This is the same principle we have for any other products or exports or imports.
Okay, that's interesting. Let's go to some questions, and maybe afterwards I come back with some more points. But we got one question on the future of work and AI. So the question is, some critics state that advanced AI will lead to mass unemployment. Do you think that is accurate? Will the robots or algorithms steal our jobs?
Well, I'm thinking we're quite far away from mass unemployment from one day to another, and this is something that has always been discussed at any revolution, even in the 19th century when mechanic clothes making machines were invented. But yes, of course, we're going to see a change on our labor markets. And this is often mistaken that it's only about not so highly skilled jobs. For example, I often hear, can we even afford to train bus drivers when we know that their job might not be existent in a few years? But it's not only the bus driver, it's, for example, tax accountants, that their jobs can very well be done in a few years by an artificial intelligence. So it is jobs across the whole spectrum, and this is something we need to take into advantage. This is where on one level we have like ethical framework, red line, where we say, okay, this job could be done by an AI, but we don't want it to be done by an AI. And then of course, jobs and job profiles will switch. I understand that this can be scary for some people. They do not know what will happen to my job. But in general, we live in such a changing world, and we need to have a different approach to our labor market, and we really need to enhance lifelong learning. And this is something where I especially see the role of state as well, to support people in switching careers and supporting people to do another studies, to learn something, to start over at another age. And if we come to a mindset that this is okay, then it's okay. And many new jobs will be created as well through the rise of digitization and AI. It might not be the same job, but there will certainly be a different job, but we need to support people in the change process.
That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, you talked about education earlier today, and the fact that our education system hasn't changed much in the last 50, 60 years. I mean, when I went to school, usually my textbooks were from the 70s, and I went to school in the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah.
The pictures of these people in these textbooks and their haircuts are like ancient. And I'm like worried that probably it's still the same textbooks as 20 years ago. And that, of course, doesn't really prepare us for this society we're living in, which is like much higher paced, right? It's not that you just learn once something and it stays the same for like 40 or 50 years, right? Because across your like the 40 years you're actually in work, or 45 years these days, probably your workplace is being reinvented 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you certainly got a point there. I went to school in Germany. I was born in 98, 89. 1998. Sometimes I mix up the numbers because in German it's the other way around, sorry. I was born in the year the Berlin Wall came down, 3 months after. In my school books in geography, there was still the GDR, and there was still Yugoslavia, and that was in the 2000s. So it's incredible, and we in general so much need to overhaul our school systems. Some EU member states are already much way ahead than others, but we just need to work on how we understand education, and it's becoming less and less that you just need to learn facts and figures and reproduce it in your task. It's becoming much more about skills, about learning to adapt, about reflecting, about understanding what's happening in front of you, about processing it, about forming your own opinion, that you are actually able to thrill and to drive in such a changing environment. So it's becoming less about knowing things. Of course, I mean, I had Latin in school. I believe as well, you should have a basic understanding of the world surrounding you. But it should be the part of like skills that should be much, much more trained and embraced.
Yes, so that's definitely true, and I mean we always advocate for like disruption and innovation, but this is only possible if people are also able to kind of re-educate themselves and being retrained, right? I mean, it wouldn't be too bad if tax consultants suddenly become obsolete because they're really expensive, right? So everyone who runs a small business or has to like fill out a tax declaration knows that it's an expensive part, and often you pay almost as much as you save in taxes. And if we can bring down these costs because it's automatized, it makes it, especially for people with like which are price sensitive, much more affordable. But then people need to also understand that if you just once picked a job or got like a professional certification, doesn't mean it lasts forever. It's probably the same for truck drivers. You know, I mean, there are these test runs on self-driving trucks, especially because they're like very long haul, and often truck drivers fall asleep because they're driving so long. I mean, it's also safety terms. Probably at some point, technology will be safer than humans for these physical manual jobs. But let me just go to another question. This one is from Maria. She asked about how to handle mistakes made by AI. So it's probably a bit like about liability, what you've already said before. So is it naive to expect them to be perfect, or are some failures likely to happen with artificial intelligence? Who's to carry responsibility in that case? Mm-hmm. So basically, who's responsible when AI fails?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about when we talk about liability. Who is responsible? And this is something I'm calling on, especially the Commission, to work on. Now, this is what I meant when we need to change the burden of proof principle. For you as a consumer, if you are using your self-driving car, it's hard for you to prove that you did not do the mistakes, that you have not operated the vehicle wrong, but that it was a problem by the vehicle, because it is above your understanding. So we need to talk about who will be responsible. Will it be developers of the software? Will it be the producer? To what extent will the service that sold you the car will be responsible? So we really, really need to look into all those aspects that we already have and see what do we need to change in the aspects of AI, because that is going to be a very important question. For example, a good example from Germany, I just recently read in the news, lawn mowing robot. He was mowing the lawn while the house owner had his oil tank filled up. And the lawnmower the digital lawnmower cut the pipe filling up the oil to the house. So there was an oil leakage. And then there was a big discussion who is responsible. By German court, it was decided that the most guilt in the situation was on the serviceman from the oil company, because he didn't secure the environment. So that's going to be really interesting debates, but could have been as well maybe that the producer of the lawnmower didn't configure his AI properly, that it cut through this rope. Was it, the court apparently said it was not the responsibility of the owner for not securing. So it was like a big debate, and we're gonna see more of this, and we need a very suitable legal framework for this. High priority.
That's interesting. I mean, this is where liability insurance comes in, right? So even if you didn't do it on purpose, but someone still needs to be liable. This is something, I mean, probably in the future, driving in a self-driving car, it's more, even when you own the car, it's more like driving a taxi, and the taxi driver causes a a crash, right? It's not your fault. You just step out and hopefully you're not injured and hopefully no one is injured. But it's like the taxi driver's insurance that has to take care of it. And probably we have to understand these use services more as platforms. So we use them and we pay for it, but we're not in charge of it anymore. So recently got an AI vacuum cleaner. So still doubting on his intelligence, but he's trying his best.
But did it make your life better?
It does and it doesn't. He keeps entertaining my cat at 6 a.m, so that's good. So I have another half an hour of sleep.
Nice.
But he also likes to eat laptop charging cables. So
that's not so nice. But I saw there are window cleaning robots as well, and I was thinking, maybe
that could do it. So one more, probably a bit more EU bubble specific question from Bill is what your view of the use of AI on content curation is. You already talked about freedom of speech on online platforms, and his question particularly relates to the Digital Services Act, which also talks about upload filters for social media. Especially right now in the COVID-19 discussion, we also see that there's different forms of like filters happening in social media platforms to deal with misinformation. What are your thoughts about the role of AI in kind of these content curation and filter discussions?
Yeah, clear no for me to upload filters. Yeah, fake news and hate speech are a problem. It's very visible right now in the COVID crisis, where we have people that have legitimate concerns about what's going on, and are the measures that are implemented, and where we have crazy people that are sharing conspiracy theories, that are sharing propaganda, that are sharing fake news, and we need to find a way to look into that. I said I'm against a general obligation for automatic content filters. They lead to massive overblocking. They're a threat to freedom of speech, and we in general, we must not put obligations to decide what is legal and what is illegal on internet service providers. It's ultimately up to courts to decide these questions. I'm very much in favor of notice and takedown mechanisms, but there are already provisions many platforms already offering. For example, on Facebook, you have like that shows you what is this kind of source. It gives you an information about the source. There are limits, for example, to forwarding function on WhatsApp. But this topic will still be on when we talk about AI, especially a huge concern many people have is about deep fakes. So videos that are through AI made to look like it's real humans saying something they never said or done. Actually, most of deepfake videos already out there are kind of revenge porn, addressed at women, or famous women, making it look like they're a porn actress, making it look like it's a famous woman. So that as well has a very frightening concern for the safety of women, and a very sexist aspect as well. But of course, there was already out there was a very public example with Obama as a deep fake. Maybe some have seen it in the last years. It was an example. So this is very worrying, and we need to talk about how do we detect it? How can we have mechanisms to detect it? And it's not going to be an easy question. It's not going to be an easy debate, not going to be easy solution, but we need to have this debate.
Right, but this is probably also for platforms interesting, right? If you Twitter or Facebook, you want to make sure that your users can trust the content being posted. And it's probably, we need to develop AI that catches AI created content, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this might be an AI chasing AI, but this general obligations to have filters. I mean, we run into this a lot working in different countries on social media strategies, and often when we even criticize something which is fake, they're talking about some piece of Russian disinformation on vaccines. Then sometimes our pieces on this get also filtered out because they just identify parts of it which deals with the fake, And basically, you sometimes can just not work on an issue at all anymore because parts of it gets flagged even when you criticize it, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes very legit scientific research gets also blocked because it might just touch upon parts of it, which is a massive limitation of freedom of speech. And we see this with campaign financing laws now that if you have the wrong IP address, you cannot set up Facebook ads anymore. I think for instance, apparently this webinar was flagged as a European Parliament webinar. So we needed a Brussels IP address to promote it on Facebook. And right now, no one of us is in Brussels due to the current situation. And because everyone is holding out at their hometowns, parents, whatever.
Yeah, I feel that's my everyday.
Facebook was like, nope, you're in the wrong country. You cannot promote it. Unfortunately, we still got a good viewership, but it's just, this is kind of just disrupts a lot of, has a lot of unintended consequences when we create.
Yeah, and of course, this concrete example is completely undermining the single market we have.
Yeah,
it's the Facebook problem you gave. It's an everyday problem I have. With my team in Brussels here, we are not able to make advertisement in Germany. I'm a German elected member, but my team here in Brussels cannot do it. So my local assistant in Germany needs to do the advertisement. Because Facebook forbids it for political causes, which is ridiculous. We have a European single market. I'm a European politician. Even if I want to advertise what I'm doing in Spain, I should be able to do it because yes, I'm elected for Germany, but I'm working for the whole of the EU. So there as well, we need to say that is not the way. I understand it was a try from them, especially in front of, they started this upfront the European elections to prevent the spread of fake news or harming news around the elections. That it's clearly undermining the rules and the single market we have. So this is not going to be the solution for it.
And even while we're drifting a bit right now, it's such an interesting topic. I mean, it's also, if you imagine you're in exile from a country that doesn't allow you to be there anymore. I mean, Hungary is, for instance, an example, which is sort of part of the single market, but some opposition politicians might not feel super safe there anymore because people just get arrested when they get critical on Facebook. And if you suddenly move to another country, you can basically not do activism in your home country anymore, even online, right? Which is kind of like, I mean, this is the idea of kind of having safe harbors for like free thinkers. And it's interesting that these social media, especially geo-blocking and these ideas or these points are actually limiting freedom of speech and limiting a free society. But just about that, Norbert, one of our followers today, also writes, one problem is that AI is especially unsuited to recognize irony and sarcasm.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's also freedom of speech, humor, maybe someone...
Many humans as well, if I may add.
Okay.
No, but it's really a problem in AI, and that's why, for example, upload filters are a bad idea, for example. Because it's hard for an AI to differentiate between, is this irony, is this sarcasm, is this allowed use? So absolutely good point, Norbert.
So Svenja, what are for you kind of the next steps with the parliaments and your group's AI strategy? What do you think are like the milestones? I mean, you have 4 years at least more in the parliament. What do you think, where can you get in these 4 years?
My group, the Renew Europe group, we actually already have a paper on AI, how we see the framework of artificial intelligence. The Commission has published its white paper, and we're going to expect legislation coming in. And in the next 4 years, we really need to shape the legislative framework for artificial intelligence. In many aspects of digitization, the European Union, Europe has already fallen quite behind. But now this is our chance to set the standard and to enhance AI made in Europe and to really, really foster innovation. So I already mentioned we have a lot of files on different aspects on AI coming up. Some of them, like the liability regime, I've been working on in the last weeks. We have more files coming up in the next weeks. The Single Market Committee is covering, of course, aspects from single market, but consumer perspective as well. AI files are discussed in the in the Justice Committee, in the Liebe Committee, which is for fundamental freedoms, interior policy, in the Cult Committee for Culture Education, and the Transportation Committee. So it's really, really broadly discussed and debated in the Parliament. And when the Commission proposes legislation, mostly coming up next year, it will get even more intense and hotly debated. And in the next 4 years, we really need to set a proper legal framework for the whole of the European Union for artificial intelligence.
Okay, so one more question, because we talked a bit about geo-blocking, and sometimes we see that you use the service in one country, it doesn't work in another, or the content is very different. So it looks that there's like a US AI strategy, there's a Chinese one, and there's a European one, more or less, right? And we could already see, for instance, GDPR. Think about what you I mean, it doesn't matter what you think about it, but one result is that there's some content you cannot access anymore in Europe because some companies, when it's publishing houses in the US, said, I think for instance, the Los Angeles Times says, okay, we have so few readers from Europe, and complying with GDPR is too expensive for us, so that little traffic. So you're just basically blocked out or locked out as a European reader, which is sometimes interesting, because when you also do public policy work in the US, then you cannot access this information anymore. But it definitely, like, these different strategies on data protection, think about what you want, created basically different internets or different content spaces, right? And I mean, the Chinese have basically blocked all global content away from their consumers or their citizens, unfortunately. But is AI also, like, are we going to be able to find a global framework for AI, which we, for instance, have for intellectual property in most cases? Or will it be really that they're basically apps in Europe and technology in Europe will look different to United States or Japan? How is this going to shape up?
Well, there actually comes in my love for international trade. Actually, you mentioned the GDPR. In the beginning, many people were like a bit confused or didn't really know what to think about it. And over time, I'm hearing from many, many businesses that the GDPR has proved to actually be a business advantage for them. Because other businesses like to make business with them because of the strong data protection. Many citizens are very, very happy with them and knowing their data protected. And I especially think GDPR and our framework on legislation is something that we would have to enhance in international trade agreements. So if we talk about e-commerce, there as well, we need to e-commerce and free flow of data and trade agreements. This is something where we would need this legislation to come in to maybe set our model of on our standard and our regulation and take approach on artificial intelligence as a new standard. I don't want the Chinese standard to become the worldwide standard. I want it to be a proper EU standard that has a clear basis on human rights, on freedom rights, on citizen rights, that is not overfilled with red tape and has a good balance between consumer interests and business interests. And if we manage to ship this into the world for good trade agreements, I'd be one happy politician.
Great, thank you. There's one more technical question. So one user would like to ask if there are technical experts involved in the process. So for instance, when you have committee meetings on these issues, are you bringing in technical experts, coders, data experts who also explain, like, basically the deep tech behind these problems?
Absolutely. That unfortunately is something I'm missing right now, that the work of a lawmaker is really based about talking to people. And right now I'm mostly just talking to a screen, but still we're getting input from experts. The white paper of the Commission, for example, was made with the support of an expert group on AI. In my committee, the Single Market Committee, we have a working group for the digital single market. I'm the co-chair of this working group, and we only make meetings with experts for actually making the lawmakers train and learn more about this different aspects. we have like, unfortunately, we needed to pause our event series because of COVID. But we're taking many different approaches. For example, gender biases in AI to learn about different aspects. And I, for example, as well hired a studied expert, a law expert on AI to help me with my aspects. We're in contact with different companies, with producers, and that's in general how laws in the Parliament are made, always in close contact and exchange with experts on this. Because I'm a politician, I'm not a coder myself, for example. So I need to learn from those that have experience on the ground, and from all this information that I'm getting, I'm taking a political decision in the end.
Well, thank you. Maybe it's Friday, so I'm not sure if we're going to exceed or need the entire hour. And this was a really punchy, potentially almost closing statement from you. Definitely also love talking about geo-blocking in the single market, where we have also worked quite intensively on, and we keep working on as a consumer choice center, because as a consumer, it's just really annoying. The moment you cross the country, sometimes your credit cards don't work anymore, or like your Amazon store shows different things, and your Netflix has different content, and just this is not there yet where it should be, especially within the European Union, where you would think we have a single market. So maybe in a couple of months, we can also have a webinar, an in-person event on the digital single market, something we are as millennial consumers very passionate about, because it's just annoying that we don't have it fully yet. But Svenja, anything else from you would like to convey to the audience about AI and the benefits for consumers?
Thank you very much for joining on your Friday afternoon, and I hope you're all gonna have a nice weekend, maybe thinking about some aspects of AI. And let me just close with AI technology is going to play an increased role in our everyday life. Don't be afraid of it. There are going to be challenges, but there are much more chances, and it's up to us as citizens, to me or other lawmakers, to turn these challenges into opportunities, and to enrich our everyday life through AI.
Great, thank you so much. You have a great, well-deserved weekend. And the recording of this is also available right now on Facebook, and later on we'll upload it on different platforms, so people can also watch the recording and share it. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you very much, Fred, for the moderation.